Picture this, the year is 2000 and you've just bought yourself a brand new family wagon. You turn up at the school gates to drop the kids off and all the other parents stop and stare. Those that are in Mercedes saloons and 5 Series BMWs stare with envy. And there's a dad with an E53 M3 who's looking at you like you're absolutely crazy and disgusted at what you're driving. Because you are driving the original Chelsea tractor. The first generation X5. Look, let's get into it. My name's Ben and welcome to Dadcars. So today, me and my daughter are driving in a first generation pre-facelift 2002 BMW X5. And this, I believe, is the car that not only changed school runs forever, but the whole automotive industry. When BMW launched this car, they tried to rebrand the SUV as this being an SAV, rather unsuccessfully, sports activity vehicle, because this was not a 4x4 that you could drive on the road, but an SUV that was designed for the road, which in theory you could take off-road. Sure, the SUV was around long before this car, Land Rover, Jeeps, even the G-Wagon. But those cars were designed primarily for their off-road capabilities. And you could argue that the Mercedes M-Class, which came a couple of years before this, was kind of the first one, but it was the X5 which really drew the lust of those looking for school-run clout. So all of the launch year X5s came with a 4.4 litre petrol V8 engine. And this one I'm driving here today has got a 6-cylinder 3 litre petrol engine, which produces around 230, 240 brake horsepower. And then a couple of years after this car, in 2004, BMW released their new V8 flagship model, which came with a 4.8 litre petrol V8, which produced around 360 brake horsepower, which, Christ, you know, back then, that must have been incredible. Now, my wife has a third generation X5. We've had that car for nearly 5 years now. So what is the contrast then? Driving a third generation X5, which came out 14 years later, and driving this first generation one. Well, the first thing that is really noticeable is the steering. In my wife's third generation X5, you can genuinely pilot that thing with one finger at all speeds, park it with one finger, everything. But you get no feedback or feel from the steering at all. It's just very refined and very easy to drive. Whereas this, the steering is much heavier, but more importantly, it's got bags more feel. And it highlights something for me with modern German cars. You know, you've got a sports mode in all modern German cars, and all it does is it like stiffens up the steering a little bit, doesn't it? Just kind of try to replicate what you get with cars of this generation. And here, I'm pleased to say that there is actual genuine feedback from the steering wheel with your steering input. Also, this car here, I assume, has a sports pack because the steering wheel is a sports design and the seats are also the BMW sport design seats. Now, if you're looking to buy an X5 from any generation, that is one piece of advice I can give you. Go for one which has got the internal sports pack, because the steering wheel and the seats in my wife's X5, which are like the economy ones, they are just not nice. These, I would say, are nicer than the third generation steering wheel and seats. But before you even get behind the wheel of this thing, the biggest thing you'll notice is the size difference. Goodness me, haven't cars got a lot bigger, and SUVs? I parked my wife's X5 next to this earlier, which I'll cut to some pictures of now, and it's incredible how much bigger it is. So compared to the current generation X5s, these first generation X5s are nearly 6 inches shorter and nearly 3 inches more narrow. And what's even more crazy is the current generation X3 is actually slightly longer and slightly wider than the first generation X5. How mad. And you'd be forgiven for thinking that that means the current generation SUVs have more space inside, which unfortunately is not always the case. I think a lot of the size gain is in sort of crumple zones and safety. So on Practicality, in the first generation X5, there is no ISOFIX. So that's why I had to dig out one of our old belt-secured child seats from the archives to strap my little one into there. Also, I would say that there's no more sort of leg room and distance between the seats and the seats in front than what you would expect from just a normal hatchback. This belt-secured rear-facing child seat is almost touching the seat in front of it. But the boot is massive, and it's got that iconic split tailgate. And I think at the time BMW actually owned Land Rover, and that's one of the design things that they actually stole from the Land Rover for this car, which has gone on to become a very popular feature of the X5. So if you're actually thinking about buying a first generation X5, the good news is they're very affordable. You can see them in the classifieds for as little as £1,000. However, they've been affordable for a very long time. As is the case with any car that's been extremely cheap for a very long time, it's likely that a lot of them out there have attracted owners who have bought them and not really taken much care of them. But generally speaking, these engines, if serviced regularly, have a good reputation for reliability. But things like bushings, door and boot mechanisms, electrical gubbins, these are all the sorts of things that you can imagine. If someone picked up a car for a couple of grand and as things started to go wrong, they just didn't bother getting them sorted. So yeah, it's worth buying with care. I mean, this car that I'm driving here today sits on only 56,000 miles. That must make it one of the lowest mile X5s out there. There's a strong chance that this X5 that I'm driving here today, the first owner only drove it a couple of miles a day, driving the 0.6 of a mile to do the school drop off and back, and that was it. Sure, they could have walked, but you don't look as cool walking to school as you did back in 2002 driving in an X5. But I genuinely believe with these first generation X5s, well, all BMWs really of this era have really sort of hit their golden years now. They've got bags of character, haven't they? Externally and internally. I mean, I love this instrument cluster here. It's really, really nice. I actually prefer this instrument cluster than my wife's third generation X5. I'm not even mad at the fact that the screen at the bottom looks like a screen of a calculator. It's kind of charming. Now, the irony of me making fun of parents buying an X5 or some other SUV just to sort of flex on the school run, that irony is not lost on me, because we bought an X5 as soon as we had multiple children. We knew we were going to have 4, so we bought an X5. I know, so yeah, embarrassing. However, that brings me on to the reason why I believe these first generation SUVs like the X5 and the Porsche Cayenne, why they've really hit a renaissance period now. So all of that kind of icky feeling of buying a car like this just purely to impress others, with the first generation cars, it is long gone. Nobody is buying a first generation X5 to impress anybody else. If you've got one of these sat on the drive, no neighbour is going to be impressed, are they? So the type of person who buys a first generation X5 is somebody who appreciates BMWs from yesteryear, appreciates having a car which has got a bit more character, a bit more feel, much more analog feel to it, like this car does. I also know I'm not breaking any news saying this, because there's been other YouTubers who've been saying this for a little while now. I mean, take for example Mike Brewer's son Auto Alex. I mean, he only very recently reluctantly sold his much loved first generation manual diesel X5, and he did that because of the ULEZ expansion. He's got a really good channel, by the way, Auto Alex. But I checked on the website this morning, and even though this is a pre-2006 petrol, it does say that it's ULEZ compliant. But even if you agree with me and you find these cars really charming today, there's likely one big reason why you won't buy one, and that is fuel economy. Because I think the official claimed figure for these is like 21 miles per gallon. In reality though, I reckon you're going to be looking at high teens, or to put it another way, around the same fuel economy as you would get from a V12 Aston Martin of the same sort of era. Depending on how many miles you're doing, that might be a deal breaker for you. Right, let's give this a little bit of acceleration. My little one is sleeping in the back, so I can't go too mad. Let's have a little look. Okay, so it's not going to tear the skin off your custard. Certainly not. I think the claim 0 to 60 is around 8.5 seconds, but certainly back in its day, this would have been more than enough performance for your typical X5 driver who liked feeling like lord of the road, or rather lord of the city, with its high seated positions. And then when they get to a roundabout, they don't have to wait like everybody else. The acceleration that you would get from this engine would still get you out and into most gaps. All right, let's test it now at a roundabout, see what it's like. Right, let's try out a bit more acceleration once this cyclist peels off. So yeah, by modern SUV standards, this is not quick by any stretch of the imagination, but it's still ample performance. I guess the problem is though, is that where it's not quick and the fuel economy is so poor, that that really is probably the thing that sort of lets these cars down, and it's probably why they're so affordable. Thank you to the owner of this car, James, who is one half of the YouTube channel Car Soul. If you enjoy your quirky modern classics, I highly recommend you check them out. James also owns a rather charming Citroen BX, which I hope to get on a Dadcars channel soon. So look, I do genuinely think, in summary, that the X5 today is a real fun little proposition. Yes, I mean little, both externally and internally. These aren't big cars. And if you're just looking for an inexpensive family wagon to have a bit of fun in, make some memories with your family, not going to worry too much about making a mess on the inside, get yourself a first generation X5, because I think they're great fun. Look, thank you all so much for watching, I really appreciate it. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment below, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye bye.